Now, one of the very interesting things you will find in life is everyone talks about something called a brand. Everyone knows, supposedly knows what a brand is. But if you really go a little deeper into it, then there are a lot of people who think if you take one product and you give it a brand name, it automatically becomes a brand. Nothing could be farther than the truth. Because actually, a brand is much more than that. I'll give you a simple example, that there is something called a commodity and there's something called a brand. And to understand the difference between the two, we have to understand how people buy. What people really buy is a ratio. They don't just buy on the basis of some product features and a price. They actually buy a ratio. This ratio has a numerator called perceived value. It has a denominator called price, the price you pay for it. Now, when the perceived value, the numerator, is equal to the denominator, which is the price, that product is a commodity. In other words, you buy loose salt, you give 5 rupees for it, you attribute 5 rupees value to it, it is a commodity. Now, let's say you buy a branded salt. You buy the salt for whatever money that you buy it, but the perceived value is more than the price that you pay for it. It becomes a brand. That brand doesn't just come from a name. It's not just because it is branded Tata salt or this salt or that salt that it turns into a brand. That name has a lot of meaning behind it. The word Tata has a lot of meaning behind it. So this is one part. The first part is commodities are different from brands. Brands are different from commodities. Commodities are those unglorified products which have no halo around them. A brand has a halo around it which lends it a perceived value. It's like taking a man and turning him into a spiritual being and suddenly he becomes elevated, he turns into a brand. That's one way to look at it. The other thing we need to understand is the difference between two brands. People think, after all, one black-brown beverage is the same as another black-brown beverage. That's not true. The way to understand the difference between brands, two brands, is to understand and liken them to people. Brands are actually like people. What that really means is, let's say you see two people from a distance, and those two people look approximately the same. They both have two eyes, one nose, two ears, one mouth, two legs, two hands, and so on. Let's say they even have the same color of skin. Let's for a moment say they have the same build, and then they come closer to you. And then they extend their hands, and they introduce themselves. One is Rahul, the other is Ajay. Now, I hope you understand that if he's Rahul, he could very well be like Shah Rukh Khan. You might attribute some meaning to his name. Suddenly, they start looking a little different. Then by their expressions, they look a little different. Then when you shake hands, they feel a little different. When you look at their resume or their CV or what they've done, they seem different. Their voices seem different. Suddenly, a whole lot of differences are seen between two people. People are actually identical to look at it, yet they are so different. It's the same with brands. I'll give you an example. Take Canon and Nikon in the old world of cameras when you used to buy an SLR camera before the advent of the mobile phone. If you said, let me say Canon is Mr. Canon and Nikon is Mr. Nikon, and you would find absolutely the same products, identical products, being completely different as brands. If I asked you a question, that here's a photograph, tell me, do you think it was shot on Canon or Nikon? And it was a photograph of colorful balloons going into a brilliant blue sky. And I showed you another photograph, which was a black and white photograph of a slum somewhere in Calcutta. I don't mean anything to Calcutta, but assume that that is what it is. I'm sure you would say the first one is Canon, the second one is Nikon. If I told you Mr. Canon is different and Mr. Nikon is different, and I would tell you that there's a bearded man with a salt and pepper beard who's very intellectual, speaks with a grave voice, is all the time serious, you would say it's Nikon. Mr. Nikon is like that. You would not say Canon. If I told you there's an outdoor personality who has a sense of humor, you would say it's Canon. And then what will happen is, if I ask you, tell me which camera is white in color, you would say, okay, the wildlife camera of Canon is white in color. The Nikon camera is never white, it's a dark black. So these two brands, even though the product features of both these cameras are identical, the two brands are absolutely a world apart. I'll give you a small exercise if you'd like to do it. Just treat Canon as a character and do his personification, describe the human being he is like he was a character in a story, and do the same for Nikon. And you'll be shocked how different they are. They would be two different brands appealing to two different types of people. And that's how marketing works, and that's how branding works with respect to marketing. I hope you enjoyed this video. There'll be a few more. Thank you.